Joining us now, Chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez. Great to have you back on the show.
Always a pleasure.
We'll get back on track here, Joe.
No, we're on track. We've been on track all morning. Tom, thanks so much for being with us. Curious.
Always a pleasure.
The two marquee races out of the way. What's your take on the state of the Democratic Party after New Hampshire?
Well, I'm very excited about the turnout. You look at what happened last night, and turnout is going to meet or exceed 2008 levels. That's very promising. You look at the number of women who turned out, and I think it was something like 55% of the Democratic turnout was women, and something like 41% of the Republican turnout was women. That shows once again that women who helped us win the U.S. House in 2016 are out there, and they are out there in force. You look at some of the exit polling I found really interesting. 81% of the voters this year were angry at Trump. You look back at 2008, it was 62% were angry at George W. Bush. So there's a lot of energy out there. Again, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We've allocated 65 delegates. You got to get to 1991 to move to the promised land. And what this illustrates to me is that the work we're doing to build the key infrastructure in battleground states is critical, and that's why our battleground buildup is so important. Now we head out to obviously Nevada, South Carolina, and after those first four, we will have allocated roughly 5% of the delegates. Super Tuesday takes us to about 40%. And we are working tirelessly to make sure Nevada goes down well, and we're working tirelessly to build that infrastructure for whomever the nominee is in a few months. This is a 90-day sprint right now that we're in, but it's really more of a marathon.
Tom, New Hampshire worked largely for one reason and one reason only. People actually went to vote. It wasn't a caucus. It wasn't a caucus state. 4 years from now, are you going to try and take this party back to Iowa for another caucus, given what happened in Iowa?
Well, I think it's really important to have that conversation. I think state parties, what we have done well as a party with our partners in state parties is helping Democrats win up and down the ballot. We've had a great set of runs, 2017, 2018, 2019, and I think we're going to win this presidential election in 2020. That's our sweet spot, building that organizational structure. And I think we have to have a conversation, and I've said this more than once, about the issue of primaries versus caucuses. We put in place rules in 2018 to incentivize states to go to primaries over caucuses, and 7 states that were caucus states in 2016 became primary states in 2020. What happened last week illustrates that we need to continue that conversation, because I think that parties, as well-meaning as they may be, I think it's better to have states run those primaries. Now, you got to pass a state law to do it, and there are some states that have indicated that with their Republican leadership, they might not want to fund a state-run primary. So it's a little bit easier said than done, but make no mistake about it. That conversation will ensue, because we have to learn the lessons from every cycle.
Tom, it's Claire. Maybe more important even than getting rid of the caucuses, which I think are really kind of in the Republican lane of less participation, making it harder to participate for all kinds of voters, especially those that are marginalized in terms of work and children and the limited time that you can participate, is the order of these primaries. There is something wrong that our first 2 primaries are essentially all white. Our first 2 contests, I should say. Are you going to propose that we at least rotate so that we get a more diverse state? Right now, we had a tie in Iowa and almost a tie in New Hampshire, but we've yet to hear from some of the most important parts of the Democratic Party. How are you going to make this more fair and more reflective of what our party is?
I think it's absolutely time, Senator, and it's good to see you, by the way. It's absolutely time to have that conversation as well. And at the end of every cycle, we begin the process of studying what went right and what we need to do better. Post-2016, we engaged in a conversation about superdelegate reform. We engaged in a conversation about primary and caucus reform. And we did those reforms to superdelegates. We've made tremendous progress in the primary and caucus reforms. And I think the conversations that will need to take place after this primary cycle is over, after we defeat Donald Trump, the conversations that need to take place are about the two questions that have been just asked, which is how do we continue that progress in moving toward more primaries, less caucuses, and how do we address the issue of order so that we have more demographic representation from the get-go. And that's a conversation I think that the party needs to have, and I will certainly be recommending that.
Hey, Tom, Yamiche is with us and has a question for you. Yamiche.
Hi, good morning, Tom. I have a compound question. The first is talk a little bit about the rules and whether or not the DNC is looking at all about adjusting them. And the second question is, what do you make of Amy Klobuchar being able to come in third? What does that say, if at all, in your mind about the importance of debates, given that you have a Democratic candidate, Michael Bloomberg, who has said that he might not ever make the debate stage at all?
Right. As to your first question, to the extent, Yamiche, that your question is about, are we going to revisit the superdelegate reforms that we put in place in 2018? My answer is a resounding no. We went through those. We had a very deliberate process. I think we did the right thing. And if somebody tries to revisit those, I will work like heck to ensure that that doesn't happen. Your second question relating to Senator Klobuchar, it really illustrates the fact that we have a deep bench. I know Senator Klobuchar. I know all of the candidates and have worked with all the candidates. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. I think the importance of debates have been highlighted. The exit polling showed that a lot of people who voted yesterday in New Hampshire were in fact influenced by the debates. And so that's why our goal is to make sure that all the viable candidates can get on the debate stage so that they can have their opportunity to make the case to the American people. That's what our job is to ensure a fair process that gives everybody an opportunity to show what they're fighting for and who they're fighting for. And that's why I'm proud of the debate process. We've got one coming up with NBC in Nevada, and I look forward to it.
All right. DNC Chairman Tom Perez, thank you so much. Tom feeling much better the day after the primary than he did the day after the caucus last week. All right, Tom, thank you so much. Before we go, Rev. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.